The Hartsville, Tennessee HAARP electromagnetic attack experiment took place not very long ago, and evidence collected suggests a secret Air Force project. Experiment 1. Large telephone systems were purchased and put into the shut-down nuclear power facility. 2. The Air Force was the paymaster. 3. Government C-130s continually drop material at the facility. 4. Armed guards and military personnel are guarding it. 5. Black helicopters and triangular UFOs have been seen in the area. And 6. Large trucks entering and leaving the area are constantly seen between 2 and 3 a.m. in the morning. The radio station checked HAARP records and found anomalous bursts of electromagnetic pulse energy at the time of the attack and a small earthquake that took place slightly after or slightly later, and it was a 2.4 magnitude quake. Exactly what the tie is between HAARP and the secret activities at the nuclear plant are not known. What is known is that the Air Force and other government agencies have an intense interest in conducting electromagnetic warfare. In the 2025 report put out by the United States Air Force, weather as a force multiplier, has some very revealing things. In 2025, U.S. aerospace forces can own the weather as they own the night now through a high-risk effort. The investment to do so would pay high rewards: precipitation modification, storm modification, space weather modification, fog and cloud modification, counter weather, counterattack weather is what they're talking about, and artificial weather, artificial ionospheric mirrors, chemicals, carbon black dust. Some of your chemtrail people are reporting black dust. That's what it is. It's carbon black dust. Communications, computer modeling. That's for this 3D. This is a DARPA operation. Directed energy. There's your attack, probably that took place in Tennessee. Global weather network, smart clouds, nanotechnology, virtual weather, and weather force support element. All part of an ongoing, obviously, DoD operation conducting by the United States Air Force. They're into all kinds of things.
Project Genesis, a proposal to the Federation.
Carol Marcus. Yes.
What exactly is Genesis? Well, put simply, Genesis is life from lifelessness. It is a process whereby molecular structure is reorganized at the subatomic level into life-generating matter of equal mass. Stage 1 of our experiments was conducted in the laboratory. Stage 2 of the series will be attempted in a lifeless underground. Stage 3 will involve the process on a planetary scale. It is our intention to introduce the Genesis device into a pre-selected area of a lifeless space body, a moon or other dead form. The device is delivered, instantaneously causing what we call the Genesis effect. Matter is reorganized with life-generating results. Instead of a dead moon, a living, breathing planet capable of sustaining whatever life forms we see fit to deposit on it.
Fascinating.
The reformed moon simulated here represents the merest fraction of the Genesis potential, should the Federation wish to fund these experiments to their logical conclusion. When we consider the cosmic problems of population and food supply, the usefulness of this process becomes clear. This concludes our proposal. Thank you for your attention.
It literally is Genesis.
Power creation.
What you just saw is actually being considered, although it may sound far out. Valid scientific studies have already been done on terraforming Mars and making it fit for habitation.
In terraforming, Chris McKay proposes that we deploy factories on Mars to produce potent greenhouse gases. As these accumulate in the air, Mars' greenhouse effect would increase dramatically. More solar energy would get trapped in the atmosphere, the temperature would rise, and perhaps in 100 years, carbon dioxide would start coming out of the soil, releasing another potent greenhouse gas into the atmosphere and raising the temperature. Soon, during the Martian summer, water would melt at the poles. And as some of this water evaporated, another powerful greenhouse gas, water vapor, would enter the atmosphere. The temperature would be high enough to sustain water year-round, and Mars would become a much more Earth-like place.
This is the sort of thing that humans are going to be able to do on Mars. We're going to be able to turn Mars into a living planet, okay? And so that while the first settlers on Mars will live in tuna cans, and 100 years later they'll live in domes, a few millennia from now they'll live out in the open, on open grassland and pineland, on a human-transformed Mars.
Scientific papers suggest strongly that HAARP and chemtrails are part of a miniature terraforming experiment to ward off global warming. It may also be used to melt part of the polar regions to allow for secret explorations for gas, oil, and mineral reserves. Part of 2025 is selective control over the weather and also climate control in specific regions. This means the elite may well be tampering with the polar regions and attempting to offset those effects by chemtrail scatterers, as well as trying to cool the planet slightly. Now, while the hype is on global warming, scientific studies will show that the actual problem is not global warming. Global warming is a precursor to something far more devastating. It's an ice age. And according to scientific studies, we actually sit on the verge of another ice age. Now, you have to understand something here. You have to understand that these people, with their scientific studies, embrace a concept, and they will act on that concept. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. What matters is that they think it's true. And if they think it's true because they have the money and the power and the position to get things done, they're going to go ahead and move on what their consensus is for a particular subject. If you study the papers, an ice age is really what they're worried about. And I think we can prove that an ice age is what they're worried about when it comes to alternatives 1, 2, and 3, because global warming, although devastating as it is, in changes of the climate around the world and shifting areas of agriculture, production, etc., the flooding, the storms, the damages from the storms is one thing, but an ice age is devastating. It's devastating for a number of reasons. The ramifications of an ice age are severe. Your agriculture basically is destroyed. And if these things can occur as rapidly as scientific evidence says they can occur, within the 10 to 20 years, you would have effectively all northern hemisphere agriculture come to a grinding stop. That means, as you probably already know, massive global starvation. The northern industrial nations would slowly become uninhabitable in spite of all the technology that they could employ to stop it. If an ice age actually begins and the ice starts to creep down over Canada in the northern United States, all those people in those regions have to move south. The southern regions are already inhabited. And that would mean massive warfare, because the northern populations would have to move into the temperate regions. Now, what's interesting about this is that the temperate regions are not agricultural intensive. Highly mountainous, jungles, etc., etc. And although that might change in a rapid approaching ice age, it would just devastate all agriculture and food production. And the world would, at that point, if it went into an ice age, would be only able to sustain a very small population, and that would have to reside in the temperate regions, the temperate zones. Now, if you could slow down global warming via the HAARP projects or through chemtrails, you would then, according to the scientific studies, slow down an impending ice age. You might even be able to stop it. Now, if you get into what they're doing for solutions to stopping an impending ice age, it then becomes a little more clear as to why possibly alternatives 1, 2, and 3 are actually being carried out. To slow global warming by any means possible, you'd have to, 1, rewild the earth. The reason you would rewild the earth is you want to have all this green absorbing all the carbon dioxide. It not only would absorb the carbon dioxide, you see, but at the same time, it releases a lot of oxygen. The second thing you would want to do is depopulate the earth. You've got to somehow depopulate the earth so that if you fail in your attempts to control global warming, then, you see, you have an area to move down, and that's possibly why you're finding AIDS and Ebola and all these diseases showing up in the temperate zones. Africa, for example, has been severely targeted. A number of places in the temperate zones are being decimated by AIDS. Your Ebola outbreaks have come in those regions, etc., etc. Now, they could also use scattering agents. We're going to show you some scientific proof that they're using scattering agents, which, to the observant, we call them chemtrails, and they're really reflective scattering agents to deflect sunlight back up. And it was estimated by Dr. Teller that if only 1% of the sunlight could be reflected back into the outer space and not absorbed by the Earth, that would be sufficient to stop global warming. Now, the next thing you could do would be to dig underground facilities, because you might have to go underground if you could not make it above ground in the northern regions. In other words, you could build massive underground complexes. It's very, very very, very interesting, I should say, that the Hopi Indians and their prophecies claim they came up from huge underground facilities during the last major cataclysm on Earth, which would have been the flood of Noah. Now, the other thing that you would do in a ice age, impending ice age, depending on how severe it got, you might want to set up Mars bases to repopulate the Earth when they get the ice age under control and they can make it recede. Or, in lieu of, they could, of course, attempt to stop it. Now, basically, how are you going to get the people, number one, to move out of the rural districts and rewild the planet? You'll find this under Rio and Agenda 21, et cetera, et cetera. There's no question that they are intending to rewild the Earth, and particularly North America. At least 50%, and if you actually take a look at the maps, about 80% of the land in the United States is to be rewilded, or we could say depopulated, and moving people into the mega city areas. But how could you do all this? How could you get people to go along with it? Well, there's only one way, actually. The rich men of the earth have studied human psychology. They know how the human mind works. Religion, they know, is the opium of the people. Therefore, why not set up a system whereby you can bring in a false Messiah? This false Messiah then rules over the earth with draconian legislation. He gets away with it because everybody thinks he's Messiah, he's God, and they know they're in trouble. You see, you bring the earth to a point of of severe trouble, just like Iron Mountain suggested, and then you bring in a Messiah, you see, to offset that. Then the Messiah, being God, can then clean up and cleanse the earth. The Messiah, God, can depopulate the earth. He can destroy as many people as he wants in the name of God. I mean, after all, this is God himself down here. And if he says a certain group of people just are not fit to live on planet Earth, the whole population, being now in serious trouble, would of course go along with it. And this is very serious, because this is really what this is all about. Behind the whole thing is, of course, Satan's attempt to sit on the throne of Jesus Christ on planet Earth as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And he's using the rich men of the earth to do it. So it's very, very interesting how all of this fits together. We're going to now go into, is there an ice age coming? Which leads right directly into depopulation. Mass human genocide is on the agenda. There's enough evidence to support it. There's several books out on the market that substantiate it with records that the population reduction of down to what they call a sustainable level is in fact in the offering. If they have to use a false Messiah to do it, they'll do it. If they can get away with it through chemical means, or if they can get away with it through biological warfare means, they will do it. The chemtrail situation is such that we believe that the chemtrails are a two-pronged sword. Number one, it is a scattering technique, that's for sure. There are some DARPA experimental trials going on, Defense Department operations, to check up on three-dimensional radar mapping, et cetera, et cetera. But I also believe, because of the materials that they're using, they're experimenting with biological agents, and they're also experimenting with weakening the immune systems, so that if they fail in every other means, all they got to do at that point is to spray the population. And phase two, because of already weakened immune systems from the chemtrail operations and people getting sick all over, and that's a fact, that's an established fact, then you've got something entirely different. You would have mass genocide virtually all over the world, and the population could be shrunk drastically in a very short period of time. It's very, very interesting that an evangelist had a vision about the United States of America, and in that vision he claimed that there was a gas warfare attack that came up from over the North Pole and decimated the United States of America. Millions upon millions upon millions of Americans were dying, he said, in the streets, screaming for mercy, screaming for compassion of the Lord. And of course, because they rejected God, they're in trouble. They're in trouble not only here and by dying, but they're in trouble after they die as to where they're headed. That's another subject, that's another tape. The point being that we have enough evidence to prove that even if an attack came over the poles and appeared to come from another country, we know how the Illuminati works. It would be an attack on their own people. And that's exactly what Jeremiah the prophet says about the Antichrist and America. He says that the King of America actually, literally, when this goes down, and we don't know when that is, but it's sooner rather than later, when it goes down, it's a result of orders that are coming right direct from our own government to destroy the population of America. Global Warming and Ice Ages, and it's a paper written and chaired by Dr. Edward Teller, father of the H-bomb. While the magnitude of the climate impact or climatic impact of greenhouse gases is currently uncertain, the prospect of severe failure of the climate, for instance, at the onset of the next ice age, is undeniable. The proposals in this paper may lead to quite practical methods to reduce or eliminate all climate failures. Notice how they word it. The onset is undeniable for the next ice age. Greenhouse warming of the Earth due to human activities is a possibility. Moreover, one for which mitigative or remedial actions of the type proposed here can at once be deliberate and effective. In contrast, Ice Age severity cooling, another in a series of events that has occurred quasi-periodically many times during the last 1.2 million years, is a practical certainty. They're positive another ice age is on the way. Moreover, a several-decade duration cold snap of Ice Age maximum temperature drop is known to have occurred in the Northern Hemisphere with essentially no warning during the last interglacial under the precursor climatic conditions only slightly warmer than the present-day one. So global warming, if it goes up a few more degrees, is going to trigger another ice age. A repetition of the 7-decade cold snap might reduce arable land worldwide at the very least 1% per year following its abrupt onset, a rate that would result in large-scale famine on single-decade time frames as planetary food reserves become exhausted. So that's what they're afraid of. And this, of course, leads to population reductions, mass genocide. We estimate that substantial worldwide reduction in fossil fuel usage over the next several decades will not occur without substantial likelihood of inducing major conflict. If the United Nations were to bring in severe restrictions on fossil fuel use, it could well bring war. Thus, the UN must be brought up to a position of absolute authority and with a peacekeeping army capable of enforcement of UN directives under State Department Document 7277. The Illuminati agenda, according to Mason Albert Pike, is a major war in the Middle East, which is outlined in Isaiah 17. That war will also be the means which allows the UN to bring in Phase 3 of 7277, disarm the entire world, and become the global dictatorship as foreseen by Prophet Daniel in the book of Revelation.
Million years, the Earth has been much colder than it is now. And the regions where most of our food comes from were too cold to grow any food at all. Scientists have recently discovered that there has been a long series of recurring ice ages in the last few million years, with relatively brief periods of warmth in between. Each of these ice ages has lasted about 90,000 years on the average, while the warm interglacial periods between ice ages have averaged only about 10,000 years. This long cycle of major ice ages, approximately every 100,000 years, suggests that we can expect another one sometime soon. But what does soon mean in ice age time? And how much warning are we likely to have? And is there anything we could do about it even if we had some warning? Recent studies of ancient ice deposits and of underground layers of pollen from trees that lived 100,000 years ago suggest that last time, the final transition from a warm to an ice age climate happened incredibly fast. Not over thousands or even hundreds of years, but in less than 20 years. When the shift occurs, the climate in many regions of the Earth cools very quickly. Fruit and nut trees that need warm weather no longer grow in many temperate regions, and they are replaced by the kinds of trees now found only in areas like northern Sweden and Alaska. The glaciers will take many thousands of years to reach their maximum point, but the climate cools so suddenly that agriculture almost instantly becomes all but impossible in most regions of the Earth. Some recent evidence suggests that we may now be more than halfway through such a rapid, perhaps less than 20-year transition period, and that we may be less than 7 years away from the beginning of the next ice age.
The chemtrail mystery and global genocide. Dr. Edward Teller suggested that we use scatterers to deflect the sunlight. The sooner the better, he said. The simplest plan is to put into the high atmosphere small particles that scatter away 1 or 2% of the sunlight. In other words, they spray it into the air. Chemtrails, the video, goes into this at length. Excellent video.
sign? Is this their personal mark here, or is it a satellite targeting?
Those that discredit the issue would often try to explain this and say that the aircraft are simply operating at different altitudes and it's a customary and normal maneuver. Unfortunately, I don't think that explanation is satisfactory because one always needs to look at this issue in terms of historical context. It's extremely important to consider the range of experience to us with aircraft since the end of World War II on a continuous basis, not on an isolated instance. So that's the number one problem that you have to deal with, is there simply is no record of such flight activity.
You see it every day. I come up to Albuquerque. I live out in the middle of the desert. I can see both ends of the state, and I see the contrails. I'd say on an average of once every 10 days, once maybe twice a month. What's the average rate of sightings of this?
2 to 4 times a week. Keep in mind that I'm a carpenter, so I work outside almost daily, where I can have a full view of the skies. And in fact, that's when I first sighted this activity. So 2 to 4 times a week is what we're seeing now.
I mean atmospheric pollution. Some believe it's a residue from a new jet fuel. Others even think it's a military weather modification program. And in Olympia, State Senator Bob Morton has written this letter to the military asking if there is a connection between the mysterious jet trails and a mysterious illness affecting flight attendants on Alaska Airlines.
I am a pilot, private pilot. I've done a lot of flying. And yes, I have to admit that I have at times been curious as to how come the width and that what appears to be the collecting of these contrails into a cloud formation. Normally they've been just a straight trail, but these do appear to be different.
So far we have few answers, just many questions. And a unique oval-shaped contrail left by a test flight. Watches it drift all the way across the state for 6 hours and finally form a huge cloud 60 miles long. Scores of contrails left by commercial flights turn into one enormous cloud an astonishing 800 miles long.
The tremendous HAARP, electromagnetic type of activity that's been going on all day. I mean all day long. It's just tremendous. There's herringbone, fishbone, I mean all kinds of it. And it's streaming this particular time in the afternoon from the southwest to the northeast. It's like it would be streaming. A lot of electromagnetic pulse activity in the atmosphere. Even up there, you see some of it up there. But there it is. And it's right overhead. We have all this streaming toward the east from the west. And my theory is, now I'm repeating, it was absolutely clear 10 minutes ago. There were no cloud patterns at all overhead. None. My theory is that there has been a HAARP pulse, an electromagnetic pulse from somewhere that took the moisture in the atmosphere and made these clouds. And you'll notice that there is definite electromagnetic influence because of the pattern.
Because chemtrails are being seen all over the world, and because no one is allowed to do these things without top government approval, then a power higher than the individual nations is directing this effort. Couldn't be done any other way. And that leaves only the Illuminati, because this is a global effort. These trails are being seen virtually all over the world. In the paper Global Warming and Ice Ages, the corresponding scattering systems may be ones of choice within this preferred class of quasi-resonant scattering units, simply because a dye-bearing fluid could be stratospherically dispersed from an airplane tank as a suitably fine aerosol. That's exactly, of course, what chemtrails is all about. They're Many, many pictures of this. Such a system might have to be comprised of scatterers designed to have a stratospheric residence time significantly less than 5 years, so that they would vertically exit the stratosphere before they migrated in latitude to unacceptable extents. In other words, they're designed so that they'll fall out and come down to the ground before 5 years is up, and of course that means we get to breathe all that wonderful toxic material. There is little question that the primary purpose of chemtrails is a global effort of the elite to head off what they think is coming in the immediate future. Drastic climate changes are coming and a new ice age. Project Cloverleaf is a most interesting project, reportedly, and although it's been not confirmed, and I don't know how you confirm these sort of things, an airline manager of mid-level claims to have been briefed in 1999 about Project Cloverleaf. It was, he said, a top-secret program of spraying using airline equipment in some cases. In other words, they would go to the airlines, they would install this equipment on the airlines. And there have been mechanics that have come forward, evidently, and claimed that, yes, this is true. They have actually seen this spraying equipment on these airplanes. About 20 employees in our office were briefed, along with me, by 2 officials from some government agency. They told us the government was going to pay our airline, along with others, to release special chemicals from commercial aircraft. The program was of such importance that it needed to be done at all cost. There were not enough military aircraft available to release chemicals on such a large basis as needs to be done. That's why Project Cloverleaf was initiated, to allow commercial aircraft to assist in releasing these chemicals into the atmosphere. If the general public knew that the aircraft they were flying on were releasing chemicals into the air, the environmental groups would raise hell and demand the spraying stop, the government officials said. The public does not need to know what's going on, and this program is in their best interest. An interesting concept. All of this makes sense if you view this as a global effort by the Illuminati to slow down their possibly artificially induced global warming to get at the polar regions. They may now realize they've gone too far, or in the alternative, have waited too long to stop the coming ice age. The dark side of chemtrails, eugenics, and population reduction. These two concepts go hand in hand. Do the elite consider the masses of the world as cannon fodder and useless eaters? They certainly have said so. Do they long for the day when they can murder them via mass genocide operations conducted secretly so they can get away with it? Using methods not detectable so no one could blame them, required the advent of biological warfare and a means of worldwide dispersal, a form of non-lethal warfare. It is actually a plot hatched in the bowels of hell itself, for by weakening the immune systems and causing people to die slowly from manufactured strains of biologicals for which there is no seeming cure, the victims turn to the pharmaceutical cartels and spend huge sums for drugs to cure their illness. Thus they are robbed of their health and their money before they perish. There is a huge interlocking cartel in the world, the Illuminati, government, military, pharmaceutical, medical complex. It's simply called the New World Order. The victims are forced to pay tribute to their executioners, only they do not realize that's what's really going on. The emerging viruses, AIDS and Ebola, nature, accident, or intentional, an excellent book on the market. We urge you to go buy it. Dr. Len Horowitz, who wrote this book, was interviewed in the video Chemtrails. The video, listen to what he said.
The warfare was directed at other countries. Why would our own military or our government want to weaken the American people at such a time when we've got China and Russia as potential enemies?
Well, the concept of Russia and China being potential enemies is
as foolish as the Arabs believe that the Israelis, and the Israelis think the Arabs are potential enemies. The Jews think the Muslims are potential enemies. The Muslims think the Christians are potential enemies. I mean, you actually have the separation of the sheeple to divide the sheeple to conquer the flock being implemented in a globalistic agenda. So really the globalists are behind Chinese development today. All third world nations now have virtually come under the control of world banking powers, and there literally are very few families that are running the entire globalist agenda. Now, in that agenda, when you consider their documents, you begin to understand why they have called for and published their desire to reduce half of the United States' population. Why it would be that they would target the United States military, for example, with Gulf War syndrome, is another great example of non-lethal military warfare. Combinations of cofactors, biological and chemical weapons, very difficult to diagnose, even harder to treat. Why would they have known these vaccines delivered these types of effects, these cofactor diseases, along with the chemical toxins gotten in the Gulf? Well, the bottom line is that with a traditional U.S. military composed of sovereign-thinking, nationalist-thinking human beings who swear that they would kill and or be killed to defend the United States Constitution against all foreign and domestic threats. Well, you see, those types of people represent a liability in the New World Order or the globalist agenda, whereby you're looking at one world government, one world peacekeeping force, NATO, one world bank, one world economy, one world court, and so that, and one world, obviously, health organization, again, largely controlled by the Rockefeller family. So that these people represented a liability in this evolutionary time of a new world order, a globalistic agenda. So you have to cull them. You have to kill many of them. You have to defund them, demoralize them, defanging the United States military. And that's precisely, if you've talked to military officers, what's been going on for the last decade with the United States military. Likewise, the U.S. population. Clay, the number one question that people always ask me is, well, if this is done for economic reasons primarily, it's foolish because why would they want to kill more people because they're making money from the people? Well, the bottom line is I liken it to a monopoly game, where at the end of a monopoly game, virtually one person or one party owns all the real estate. And then at the end of the game, you put the board away. Well, you don't do that on planet Earth. But what you do is if you own all the real estate, and virtually anyone that's indebted, anybody that has basically taken out loans now and owes their life to the banksters, which ultimately is controlled by one globalistic banking economy now, that they own all the property, really. And so that at the end of this game, called the New World Order, you don't put away the board, you simply change the borders. You change the board, and you get rid of the players that you don't want. And the players that you don't want, and again, I have to really reflect on Bible scripture, that it is not against flesh and blood with whom we do battle. It is spiritual warfare that is ongoing. And so ultimately what we're looking at is getting rid of Christians, getting rid of Jews. Why? Because these are the covenanted people. Getting rid of black people because they're heavily, heavily spiritually evolved. Their DNA is among the oldest in the world, and that they are certainly very, very soul-filled people. Getting rid of the natives in virtually every country. North American natives particularly are very spiritual people. You see that the primary targets that are very well articulated in the murals, for example, in Denver Airport, that I show during my lectures and presentations, and will be in the new book that I have coming out, God willing, on the spring of 2001, is called Death in the Air, and it goes into this chemtrail issue very heavily, and the spraying of malathion and the spraying of anvil and the West Nile virus issues, and then shows in living color these hideous pictures showing genocide of spiritually endowed human beings, because ultimately this is spiritual warfare. Now, I know that that's a foreign concept for a lot of ungodly people to accept, but that is the reality from a Harvard graduate researcher who critically looks at all the evidence before I say things and state my opinions about things. Ultimately, I can only conclude that after studying the globalists, understanding how they think, their ideology, again, most of them are Harvard trained. That's my alma mater. So, the fact is that I get where they're coming from, and where they're coming from is a position of devil doing. And so this is why, if you ask me why it is that they're taking out the United States military, this is a very spiritual country. It was founded on some basic spiritual tenets of Christianity, and ultimately it's got to go.
Len, one final question. What can the American people do to protect themselves?
Well, I suggest people get the book called Healing Celebrations. It deals with the 5 steps: detox, deacidification, boosting immunity every way possible, then going on and doing oxygenation and bioelectric therapies, Clay, and then the spiritual correlates and antecedents. 5 of the most important spiritual lessons we need to learn in order to have miraculous healings and stand firmly in the by grace and God's grace in the Holy Spirit of divine protection. That's ultimately what we need to do.
Eugenics and the Georgia Guidestones. The Georgia Guidestones outlined the entire agenda of the elite and were put there by secret societies called mystery. In the Bible, they outlined the New World Order and a massive genocide planned to do it. It's an incredible monument located on a high hilltop in Elberton County, Georgia, and made of solid granite monoliths. These stones are engraved in 8 different languages and contain 10 guiding principles to govern the New World Order. It's actually a mockery of the 10 Commandments. The chief guiding principles concern eugenics. 1. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. 2. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Maintaining humanity. In order to maintain humanity under 1/2 billion people, you must exterminate 5.5 billion or more of them to drop to that level. This is global genocide on a level never heard of in all of history, yet no one says anything about it. The state of Georgia even promotes this hideous monument to Satan. In order to maintain humanity under 1/2 billion, you have to introduce a global eugenics program upon the masses of the world. The Bible says the time is coming when marriage is forbidden. Reproduction will be in the labs per the report from Iron Mountain. There is no question but that a universal requirement that procreation be limited to the products of artificial insemination would provide a fully adequate substitute control for population levels. These people in the elite mean business, and they think the earth is way, way overpopulated. Such a reproductive system would, of course, have the added advantage of being susceptible of direct eugenic management. Its predictable further development, conception, and embryonic growth taking place wholly under laboratory conditions would extend the controls to their logical conclusion. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. This is what Hitler was doing. The Bible says that a global Nazi fascist police state is coming. The Georgia Guidestones show us how they're going to do it. Biological warfare is the only available means to severely reduce the world population by spraying chemicals and or biological agents around the world to destroy human immune systems. The goal is accomplished. If scatterers were also toxic to humans, that is, they attack immune systems, then you have an ideal combination. You kill 2 birds with 1 stone. With immune systems weakened via HAARP, electromagnetic environments, vaccinations, and toxic chemtrails, you then only need to introduce a deadly virus, and mass genocide becomes a stark reality, with no one to blame. The Bible calls this day a day of slaughter. Many physicians who have studied the AIDS virus and many official records have concluded it was manufactured under orders from the UN's WHO, the World Health Organization. Now the UN is calling for mandatory AIDS vaccination for all people. To what ultimate purpose? And what would be contained in those vaccinations? Rewilding the world, Agenda 21, and a host of other Rio Earth Summit concepts go hand in hand with depopulation. It returns the Earth to a pre-man condition. This greening soaks up excess CO2, thereby slowing global warming. If an ice age does occur, the population has already been reduced to a sustainable level. And so you see they work this concept together. This rewilding also brings all major food production areas in the United States under direct UN control. The maps they have actually prove it. The same appears to be true in other countries as well. Hence, the New World Order will also control all the food production of the world. By controlling all farming via government regulations and controls, the farmers are reduced to serfs, as in the Dark Ages. By controlling the food supply, distribution, and purchasing of foodstuffs, they can totally control the masses. Here's a UN rewilding map for the United States. Red is no use whatsoever. You can't live there. You can't even fly over it. Yellow is restricted use. Only officials can be there. And you'll notice this map is predominantly red and yellow with very few areas of green. Look at the Midwest and what they do there. Horrible situation. And these are maps that they're going to be using. In fact, they are already implementing this sort of thing all over the country. We propose nothing less than the rewilding of North America, nothing less than the renegotiation of the human covenant with the land. And this new vision has a detailed plan for scientifically based wilderness recovery networks for the entire continent. In so doing, we will set a new agenda for conservation in North America. We will reframe the conservation debate in terms of the continuation of the evolutionary processes and the flourishing of all Native American. This is a big, big project. The Wildlands Project is coming together at the grassroots conservation activists and conservation biologists in a time of crisis. You see, there's your crisis again. This has been magnified, like Iron Mountain said you had to do, as a crisis. We at the Wildlands Project are tired of campaigning for mere slowing of the rate of destruction of national diversity. We will no longer accept the status quo. What we seek is nothing less than the full flowering of the natural biological diversity of North America. We welcome all those who share this audacious vision and passion. Dave Foreman. He was one of the founders, actually, of the Wildlands concept.
But below grounds, as manicured as the guests, a secret government facility was operational from 1962 to 1995. Fritz Bugas directed the resort's audiovisual services for 25 years. But that wasn't his only job. For 24 years before that, he'd been an Army intelligence officer. And his other job here was managing the bunker.
In the 30-plus years that the fallout shelter was in operation, literally tens of thousands of individuals have walked through this foyer not knowing what was behind this door.
In 1958, the Greenbrier was adding a new wing. Federal officials had contracted with the resort to build a secret facility at the same time. A place for Congress in case the Soviets radiated Washington. The new construction was perfect cover.
The former Congressional Relocation Facility located here at the Greenbrier was a self-contained, sustaining facility. It had an independent power, water, and air source, as well as a supply of freeze-dried and dehydrated foodstuffs that would feed 1,000 individuals for a period of 60 days.
Congress would need to function after a nuclear attack, including decontamination chambers. The new exhibits and meeting rooms had explained 3 years of digging and building. But no one realized they were part of and covered the bulk of the 5-star bomb shelter. In October 1962, the bunker was nearly complete. And just in time for the Cuban Missile Crisis. Not just another armed and guarded military base. From here, the people who monitor North America's air and space defense system keep eyes on the skies. For 30 years, the mission at Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center has been to deter nuclear war. And invisibility is always the uniform of the day. A tunnel nearly a mile long bisects the mountain. From entrance to blast doors, it's a 5-minute drive through solid rock. This is where more than 1,400 U.S. and Canadian military personnel watch everything that moves in Earth orbit and below. They do it with electronics and sensors that track satellites, manned space vehicles, aircraft, space debris, and missiles. The Operations Center took shape starting in 1961, when the Army Corps of Engineers blasted through granite. They wanted to build a bunker that could survive an earthquake or a nuclear detonation. They excavated a 5-acre tunnel system, removing more than 1 billion pounds of rock. The whole complex sits on steel springs, 1,300 of them, to absorb shock waves that go with earthquakes and nuclear blasts. If the U.S. ever goes to war, Cheyenne can seal itself from the outside world behind 25-ton blast doors. Now that's a bomb shelter. In emergencies, Cheyenne is self-sufficient. 6 2,800 horsepower diesel engines, the kind that drive battleships, generate electricity. A spring-fed cave lake is the emergency water supply. And temperature's no problem. Cheyenne uses so many computers that they produce enough heat to warm the whole facility. The 12-member battle staff has met twice to deal with national emergencies since the complex opened in 1965. the 1973 Yom Kippur War, and the 1991 Persian Gulf War. The command center is Cheyenne's brain. Here, the staff monitors events around the world based on data collected from a global network of space sensors and land sites.
This is audio free, right?
Cheyenne personnel can communicate almost instantly with the Pentagon's National Military Command Center and other defense operations centers worldwide.
Here at the Missile Warning Center, we provide warning of launches of strategic and theater missiles from anywhere in the world. In addition, we also provide warning of any nuclear detonation anywhere in the world. We do this 24 hours a day and 7 days a week.
During the Gulf War, center personnel, aided by satellites, alerted U.S. troops whenever the Iraqis launched Scud missiles.
Argument parity is 345.
Analysts in the Space Control Center track more than 7,000 objects orbiting the Earth and can resolve attacks, threats, and other problems in space. For modern warriors at Cheyenne, this is the battle zone. Clean, well-lit, air-conditioned, and enemy-free.
Well-known underground facilities, Iron Mountain, that's a Rockefeller installation for elite protection of the bankers. Mount Weather, that's FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, COG, Continuity of Government. China Lake, Black Operations, Naval. Dulce, Black Projects. Area 51, Black Projects. Denver International Airport has a large underground facility under it, unknown for what that purpose is, and many others. How many private facilities owned by the elite are there? Where would they be located? They could be located in remote regions all over the world. You'd never know anything about it. The general public is slowly being conditioned for a major disaster by television, books, and movies like Deep Impact and Armageddon, with the implementation of martial law and elite selection for survival.
Ever since the comet was discovered, we've been hoping and working for the best. But we've also been planning for the worst. Our strategy has been twofold. First, our Strategic Missile Command is preparing to coordinate with the Russians a massive strike of Titan missiles to intercept the comets. If we can deflect these comets enough, they will bounce harmlessly off our atmosphere and head on out into space. Unfortunately, the Titans cannot be launched until the comets are only a few hours away. And while we are confident the missile attack will succeed, it is only prudent that we now take cautionary steps to ensure the continuation of our way of life, to guarantee that there will be enough of us left to rebuild a new world in the unlikely event that the comets do strike the Earth. So, in the soft limestone of Missouri, we've been preparing a network of immense caves, and they're almost finished. And we can put 1 million people in them. And that 1 million people can survive there underground for 2 years until the air clears and the dust settles. Now, the cave is more than a dormitory. It's our new Noah's Ark. We're storing seeds and seedlings, plants, animals, enough to start over. On August 10th, a computer will randomly select 800,000 Americans to join the 200,000 scientists, doctors, engineers, teachers, soldiers, and artists who have already been chosen. Other countries are preparing similar caves along whatever lines they feel are best to preserve their way of life. This is ours. Beginning tonight and continuing until the crisis passes, I am declaring a state of martial law. The armed forces and the National Guard are working with local law enforcement. A national curfew begins at midnight tonight. Now, wherever you are, go home. Stay off the roads after sunset. Crimes against persons or property will be dealt with swiftly and harshly. News stations around the nation are being faxed copies of the lottery procedure as we speak, and they'll be broadcasting details to you in a few moments.
We now have the details for the National Lottery. Those of you who have been pre-selected will be notified within the next few minutes. For the rest, on the night of August 10th, those whose social security numbers have been randomly selected by computer will be notified. While some Americans over 50 years of age have been pre-selected for the ARC due to their expertise in a necessary field of study, no men and women over 50 in the general population will be included in the lottery. The evacuation of those who have been selected for the ARC will take no longer than 2 days beginning on August 12th. During this 2-day period, no unofficial travel will be permitted. Those
We have seen substantial proofs that the concepts behind the Alternative 3 broadcast are in fact true and are being carried out and hyped by major media outlets. The third alternative, Moon and Mars bases, built in the strictest of secrecy, is also a 90% or higher probability. Anti-gravitational propulsion devices remove your weight and size limitations. That means that they can build large capacity ships of various sizes and shapes depending upon their requirements. And they could be constructed and launched from remote areas of the world. Because weight is no longer a problem, the immense shielding requirements for crew and passenger compartments because of lethal radiations from the Van Allen belt in outer space are very capable of being accomplished. Is it possible that the elite have developed such advanced technology in secret, that they have advanced bases on the Moon and Mars and have had them for some time, as advanced as shown in the movie Forbidden Planet? Simple answer is yes. They probably have. And as we said, there's a 90% or even much higher probability that it's true. With size and weight restrictions removed, then they can build huge ships. Hainebu 2, for example, the German plans that we're going to show you suggested UFOs 400 feet or higher in diameter. Huge cigar-shaped UFOs are being reported, some well over a mile long. Because there are no weight limitations when you're using anti-gravitational devices, then it is no longer a consideration. The consideration becomes, what are you using it for? Large capacity cargo operations, freight hauling for minerals and passengers, as in batch consignments of Alternative 3. These giant UFOs could be built and sent away to Mars or the Moon, and we would not be the wiser whatsoever because of it. In the television release of Alternative 3, they play what they claim is a recording of astronaut Bob Groden, obviously not his real name, speaking of these huge UFOs. During the interview for TV, he spoke of others being there first.
This is astronaut Bob Groden before his first moonwalk. More than one of the men who were part of that first Apollo program found it difficult to readjust to life back on Earth, but no one more so than this man. Here he is, as he is today. 5 years on. There were psychological factors, it seemed, which on the surface could explain away the changes in personality, the instability, the breakdown of former relationships. But what exactly were those psychological factors?
hear this constant bleed we have here now?
Affirmative. We have it.
What is it? You have some explanation for that?
We have none. Don't worry. Continue your program.
Oh boy, it's really something super fantastic here. You couldn't ever imagine this.
Roger. We know about that. Could you go the other way? Go back the other way.
Well, this kind of ridge, pretty spectacular. My God, what is that there? That's a hollow. What the hell is that?
Go tango. Tango.
There's kind of light there now.
Roger. We got it. We've marked it. Lose communication. Bravo Tango. Bravo Tango. Select Jezebel. Jezebel.
Yeah. But this is unbelievable. Recorder off. Bravo Tango. Bravo Tango.
Bravo Tango, Jezebel. A form of code, but meaning what? Certainly nothing to the 600 million people listening on Earth below. From Boston, Massachusetts, we arranged for ex-astronaut Bob Grodin to talk to us. The interview was filmed to be edited later. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me in Boston?
Yeah, go ahead.
Grodin showed no reluctance to discuss the breakdown he'd suffered after his return from space. But nothing remarkable seemed likely to come from the interview until I asked this question. It's been suggested, among others by some very responsible people, that you, all of you on the Apollo program, saw far more out there than you've been allowed to admit publicly. Would you like to comment on that suggestion?
What the hell are you trying to do to me? Can I ask you that? What the hell are you trying to do to me?
Well, I was only trying to...
You trying to screw me? Is that what you're trying to do? You trying to screw me? Like that dumb bastard Valentine? Is that what you're trying to do? Well, why me? I'm up there to do a job, man. That's all I was up there to do. I don't have to answer questions.
Oh, hell. What's the matter with this thing now?
It's not this end. Somebody's pulled a switch somewhere.
That somewhere, so far as we could discover, was neither in London nor in Boston, but in the satellite connecting the two. The incident has never been explained. Nevertheless, that one word, Valentine, was enough to send Colin Benson and a camera operator, with some very innocent-looking home movie equipment, across the Atlantic posing as tourists. This is what they brought back on 8mm film.
I would never have found Bob Grodin unless he had been willing that I should. But starting with the few leads I had, I was brought eventually to the remote bungalow where he now lives.
You want a beer?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Just go on. I'll wait you.
Annie! Annie, can we have a couple of cold beers?
Well, what do you want to do? Do you want to do it out here or in there? Doesn't make any difference. I don't think we're going to have a private conversation.
We're from here.
Huh? Michael, baby. Meet the professor.
Hi. Thank you.
You want to reveal all? Well, that's Annie. She's not my daughter, right? You put that on the record. Right?
You got it, Bob.
She's a great kid. Well, without her, I'm pretty lucky.
We talked for an hour before Grodin became willing to discuss our previous and abortive satellite interview.
You try that.
Sure, thanks. What exactly can you tell us about Valentine?
Well, what I remember of Valentine is that he showed up at NASA with some tape he made. And he got pretty damn excited when they played it back in that jukebox.
Jukebox?
Well, the decoder. I mean, you can pick up a signal if you got the equipment, but you can't unscramble that.
Without NASA's equipment?
That's right. And some young guy helped him do it. You should have known better than that.
Was it this man?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it looks like him. Look, are you sure you don't want bourbon?
No, beer's fine. What you're saying is that Valentine was killed because of what he discovered on that tape.
Well, I'm saying nothing. I just saw the way that that those guys looked at him, and I knew those looks because they looked at me the same way.
Those guys?
Come on, get a real drink, will you? Come on.
Okay, Bob. What did happen out there? The moon landing?
Well, we had kind of a big disappointment. And we didn't get there first.
What do you mean?
Those later Apollos, they're just a smoke screen. They cover up what's really going on out there. And the bastards, they didn't even tell us. Nothing.
Well, what is going on?
Well, how the hell should I know? You asked the Pentagon, you phoned the Kremlin? After all, they were first out of space. I mean, you don't think they just gave up, do you? Give up? I'm not a drink. You want a drink?
No, I don't think so. Bob, you got to tell me, what is going on? I mean, what did you see?
Well, we came down the wrong place. And it was crawling. Maybe what we were on looked like a milkworm.
You're talking about men from Earth?
Do you think that they need all that crap down in Florida to get two guys up there on a bicycle? The hell they do. You know why we're there? To give them a good PR story for all the hardware they're shooting out into space. Now, we're nothing, man. Christ, we're nothing. You know why we're there? To keep you bums happy. Stop you from asking questions about what the hell is really going on out there.
While Grodin is an actor, did the producers of Alternative 3 know for a fact that this portrayal is close to accurate? And who was there before NASA? Grodin said, ask NASA, ask the Kremlin, the intelligence agencies. Is this a top secret collective?